again with you. This is our fourth program, and my guest today is Mr. Fred Devaux, a well-known business person on the island for the last 60 years, and Mr. Richard Peterkin, a well-known accountant and on the island. Our topics today will vary. We have four topics to deal with. The pains of air transportation within the region, our unemployment, lack of investment, and a growing deficit. And I will ask Mr. Devaux to start off at this point. Mr. Devaux, any one of the topics you may touch on at this time.
I think a lack of investment is possibly one of the most important, by virtue of the fact that we have, over the last couple of decades, relied very heavily on FDI, foreign direct investments, coming into St. Lucia, and that has, among other things, the critical benefit of enhancing the cash flow, if you like to call it, and the reserves of the ECCB in St. Kitts, making a possible devaluation less likely, provided the FDI keeps flowing in. If we can't attract investment from abroad, which is proving to be increasingly difficult, we have to generate it from within, and to generate it from within, you have to have confidence in the economy, and right now that confidence to me appears to be decidedly waning, on the downturn, and I'm afraid I have to speak very bleakly. St. Lucians in general have very little confidence in the future because things are bad, companies are failing, there'll be, I'm sure, more failures to come unless we can get an economic pickup. But investment from abroad can be obtained without too much trying. In fact, I think a lot of it is already there knocking on our doorstep. For example, alternative energy, wind power to be specific, and that is the one that I have examined fairly critically. If wind power was introduced into St. Lucia and generated 40% of our requirements by, let us say, we're now in 2014, by 2020, which I believe might be the government's goal, but I believe the government's goal is not 40% but 20%, that alone would enhance the GDP immediately and on an ongoing basis by 1.3%. Loose-Lek sell to the community 145 million to 150 million US dollars of electricity a year. I'm told that that bill can be very immediately and effectively cut by 20%, and 20% of 145 million gives us something like $30 million US, which immediately accounts to the GDP enhancement that I'm talking about. And what disturbs me is that the funds for those investments in wind power and in solar power, all renewable energies, have been there, as I understand it, for quite some time in the form of proposals put forward to government, proposals for the most part that would have cost the economy zero. We would not have had to dig in our pockets for any of this money at all. The only slightly adverse effect would have been on the profits of Loose-Lek, which would have fallen, but not by a tremendous amount. And the shareholders of Loose-Lek, who now in total get something like 17 million EC dollars worth of dividends a year, would possibly have their dividend cut by, let's say, $5 million. So the dividend from Loose-Lek would be not 17 but 12, considering that 40% of that dividend goes to foreign investors. The cut to local investors, including government and the city council, would not be significant in comparison to the saving that could be made. This involves, which is being done, I gather, appointing a regulator for utilities, including water, changing the Loose-Lek Act. I don't know how watertight that is and whether we can change it easily, but everything has to be tried. And to me, this is the quickest way to get a permanent, long-term shot in the arm for the economy, alternative energy. You mentioned earlier medical schools, I believe. I'm not going to usurp anybody else's thunder, but I have quite a lot to say on other areas in which investment could be enhanced, but I won't take up too much time. I'll leave it at alternative energy.
Okay. Now, I'm just going to deal very quickly with the airline industry within the region, based upon a meeting which took place yesterday in Barbados, where the chairman, Mr. Gene Holder, has now categorically stated that all the islands that have not been contributing towards LIAT will be coming in for a very rude awakening. Additionally, the islands that are not paying anything at all would have to start paying. But I have a problem with that, because although St. Lucia, for instance, has contributed very little, because Dr. Anthony has clearly stated that he wanted a clear plan as the direction of LIAT. What we have found is that LIAT, when they do not pay their landing fees, that it actually becomes a subvention, because the money is not paid and they can't push it through. But you know, we have said time and time again that you can't fly an empty plane and expect to make money. The small islands, there should be some sort of a smaller aircraft to link them together, and let maybe St. Lucia, Barbados, Antigua and St. Kitts probably be the main hubs, and they will be fed into that hub. And then, because the recent investment of 156 million US dollars for 6 or 8 ATRs, I don't think was a wise decision. And now we are being told that the airlines cannot fly into certain islands because of the wind factor on those new ATRs. So to me, all that's kind of very, very difficult to comprehend when a company is running tight on money. So the big question is that we cannot do, people talk of LIAT. There's nothing wrong with LIAT as the name LIAT. What the problem is the airlift to the islands. We have, I think, the wrong aircrafts, and we need desperately to do something, because this really will affect business and tourism, because that is extremely important. And I've repeatedly said that Caribbean Airlines is sitting down there where they actually can get fuel at 1/3 the price that we're paying. So instead of coming to the islands that have very little money to put forward, why don't we deal with it in that vein, instead of going the roundabout route of all these threats? For instance, Caribbean Airlines flies here directly from Trinidad every day, but yet the airline is not allowed to fly to Barbados from St. Lucia. Something has to be radically wrong. And on that score, we hope and pray that something can be done very quickly. Richard, you've heard from Mr. Devaux and myself, one the airlines, one thing. And you are one with a very good general knowledge of most things. How do you feel about it as an economist?
Well, inside of the airlines, I was very interested that both Ralph Gonsalves, the Prime Minister of St. Vincent, and Dr. Holder, first of all, saying the same thing, that LIAD has 100 days in which to, basically come up with a plan to restructure, to prevent the, considerable losses that they are making on a daily basis. However, in there was, as you said, an implied threat that essentially, in the absence of a wider shareholder base among the islands, which would perhaps pay for routes that are not profitable, LIAT may have no other choice than to basically rationalize its routes and stop flying in, to certain islands, and which would clearly have a bad impact on islands like Dominica, St. Vincent, maybe even St. Kitts and Grenada. Whatever it is, there clearly is a growing crisis because money is getting very tight. LIAT is clearly, with the losses, not able to raise money to continue to subsidize its losses, and neither will the governments pay for it. Something has to give. And LIAT is not perhaps unlike the governments of the region in the sense that they are faced with a revenue situation and an expense situation which results in a loss. The expenses are higher than the revenue. And governments are now looking at all of the options, one of which includes the reduction of public sector salaries, the reduction of other expenses, because they cannot increase the revenue any further. There comes a point in which taxation is inelastic, and to increase taxes any further would simply, either bring the economies to a grinding halt or reduce the net effect that you're getting. LIAT is the same. LIAT cannot afford to increase its rates. Its rates are too high for interregional travel.
But question for you, Richard. Talking about rates, as you very well know, there are a lot of taxes against LIAT. Would it not be better to reduce the taxes and try to get it from another angle to increase the possibility of people traveling? Because what is going to happen, I know for a fact that traveling has been reduced by at least 25 to 30% by many people who just can't afford those rates anymore. Do you think that it would be in the interest of the governments to get together and reduce, first of all, I don't know exactly what the rates are on landing fees and also the security taxes and so on, because they can get it from another angle. Because my take on the whole situation is that if we can have economic activity and we can produce money within a country, you're going to get the revenue anyway. So why not let things unfold in a manner that is palatable to business?
Yeah, and I think clearly if governments were in a position to say, okay, our annual take from the landing fees and other things is X, and we are prepared to put that in, or to reduce it to the point, and become shareholders of LIAT, and so that LIAT will now be able to drop its prices and thereby get more business, and we will get more revenue from that extra business.
Correct.
They got to kind of do those
right.
numbers and see if that makes sense, because as it is, the fares are too expensive, and so that has to change. The airline the costs are too high, and that has to change. And I think that if LIAT could show that with better fares, better aircraft, and lower costs, that it could actually, even if it was break even.
Correct.
Then you might find almost every government prepared to say, fine, I'm in.
Yeah.
As long as I don't have to be constantly feeding this beast.
Correct, yeah.
And so the question is, how can they prove that? If you look at the airline industry as a whole, the reality is that very few of them have made money over the years because of competition, because of high costs, because of fuel costs. So what has happened in all of them, and American was the last to do it, they went in particularly the U.S. Airlines, they went into Chapter 11. Yeah. And Chapter 11 allowed them to restructure, to reduce costs, to reduce pensions, and come out leaner and meaner.
Correct.
American was the last to do it, and they paid a price, and they basically had to merge it with U.S. Airways. So I think LIAT just has to look at these options. I've always said, and I told I can't remember the guy from Barbados, it wasn't Dr. Kohler, that LIAT needs a Chapter 11.
Yeah.
It needs a situation whereby they are said, guys, there's no other choice.
Yeah.
And that means going to the pilots and the ground staff and everybody else and saying, this is it, do you want a job? Or is it going to just collapse?
Yeah.
Then maybe somebody else is prepared to come in, but we can't afford in many respects to do without the LIAT. We need an interregional
That's right.
tariff.
There's no question
and
about it.
Neither can we afford to have that and continue to subsidize it at today's rates.
One quick question for you, Richard. LIAT has a virtual monopoly in the islands. If you take the Bahamas, which has, I think, 500,000 people, there are about roughly 8 airlines. Would you recommend that some sort of competition be brought in? Because what has happened in the past, everybody talks about, well, LIAT is here, but whenever a competition comes in, LIAT puts another plane side by side and destroys them. You see, we're not in the business for destroying people. There should be a level of continuity. So on that score, I think, for instance, you have other small airlines. You have, for instance, CARICOM Airlines in Suriname, which is willing to come in. There are 4 or 5 planes, small planes. And you take, for instance, St. Vincent as a perfect example, where Mr. Gonzalez has built this airport now. It's been going on for 5 years. Pretty close to $1.2 billion has been spent. It's far from being completed. In my humble opinion, had he taken Ardersville, fix it up nicely, Huronora is only 15 minutes away, and have 4 or 5 planes going a day, they could serve anywhere at all. and you still have the normal liat going through. But you know, this is what happens here now, and then we build these debts, we're getting poorer and poorer. And by the admission of our Prime Minister, the bond situation, which was a relief system to them, is virtually non-existent, because, like you said, people are not going to put their money into a situation where it becomes precarious, and so life goes on. This is Open Mic. We must take a break for our sponsors. Thank you.